All right, so thank you all for attending today's event. And I just want to do a few Zoom housekeeping notes before we get started. So if you notice on this slide here, if you're using a computer, on the bottom left corner of your screen, there is a mute and stop video button. Right now, you'll notice that all of you are currently muted by the host. And that is to prevent any feedback that we may get from some of your devices, or to prevent any background noises while our presenter is sharing his presentation. And also there is a start and stop video button also located on the left side of your screen. If you are not interested in sharing your background or video footage of yourself, please feel free to hit the stop video button, and that will turn your screen completely black so nobody can see your face or anything in the background of your household and things like that. Also, right now, because you're currently muted, please feel free to use the chat feature located on the bottom of the screen to pose any questions that you may have while the presentation is going. It will be directed straight to the host, and we will do our best to answer your questions while the presentation is taking place. Also, at the end of the presentation, we will allow for a Q&A session. You will be unmuted at that time to pose any questions that you have. We do ask that you, to prevent people from talking over each other, which I don't think that will happen, but just in case people decide to ask the question at the same time, we would like to prevent that. So if you notice, there is a participant button on your screen, and if you click on that, it will allow for you to have a raise hand feature that is on the right side. And if you click on that, we can call on you to ask the questions if you would like to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Last thing is the top right corner is a speaker view. And that will allow for you to just see our speaker as he is presenting. The other option is a grid view, and if there are multiple people who are currently utilizing their video, it will give you something that what I consider is a Brady Bunch screen, where you will see everyone who is currently inside of the Zoom meeting at this time, and it will give you a list of all of those people on the screen. So you want it to be in speaker view while the presentation is going on. That way you will only see our presenter. And I am going to stop sharing my screen at this time. And right now, what I am going to do is I am going to thank our presenter, Dr. McCorkle, today. And I would like to say a few words about him as well. He is the author of 3 collections of poetry, Evidences, The Subtle Bodies, and his latest work, In Time, which is a part of Triptych, which collects 3 books of poetry, including those of Peter Grand Boyce and Robert Miltner in 1 bound volume. Evidences was selected by Jory Graham, which won the American Poetry Review in 2003. He has received the St. Lawrence Campbell Poetry Award and Fellowship. He is also the author of The Still Performance, a study of postmodern poetry. Dr. McCorkle is the editor of Conversant Essays, Contemporary Poets and Poetry. He has published and presented on a wide range of writers, including John Asbury, Elizabeth Bishop, and Charles Wright. Dr. McCorkle's poems have appeared in numerous publications, from the American Poetry Review to the Kenyon Review. He is currently teaching at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in the Africana Studies program. And we thank you for being here today, and we will turn this program over to you to get started.
Thank you. Thank you. So welcome everyone. And I want to thank Wood Library and Alexis for inviting me this evening. So I'm going to read for about 40 minutes, maybe 35 minutes, and then turn over the screen for a conversation with everyone, and try to answer any questions you may have. So I'd also like to recognize that behind me, you can't actually see, but somewhere behind me is Seneca Lake, and that I am reading, and I live on the ancestral grounds of the Seneca, and across from where I'm reading also is Rose Hill Mansion, which was built in the turn of the 19th century, and African Americans were at one point working the farmlands as enslaved people there. So I mention all of these things because this whole area is has deep deposits of different histories and communities. And a lot of my poetry really looks at those ideas of community. I like also to start with someone else's poem, and I thought I would begin with a reading by a short poem by Denise Levertov. And I thought it was kind of fitting for this moment that we're in. Denise Levertov was a British poet who was also involved with the Black Mountain School. And this actually is in a collection that came out called an anthology of Black Mountain poets. Black Mountain School was in operation from the 1930s to the 1950s and had many famous folks at it, including Robert Creeley, Robert Duncan, John Cage, Buckminster Fuller. So here's Denise Levertov's poem, Action. I can lay down that history, I can lay down my glasses, I can lay down the imaginary lists of what to forget and what must be done. I can shake the sun out of my eyes and lay everything down on the hot sand and cross the whispering threshold and walk right into the clear sea and float there. My long hair floating and fishes vanishing all around me. Deep water, little by little one comes to know the limits and depths of power. So I'm going to read mainly from Triptych and my section or my collection of poems in this volume. The three poets who are collected in Triptych, myself, Peter Granbois, and Robert Miltner, we don't know each other. We were literally brought in kind of a John Cage-like fashion by the editor together all at once without our knowing what each other was writing. And our books were already finished. They weren't in response to each other. So my collection in time is very different from Peter's and Robert's, and yet they share certain interests in mythology and ideas of time. So I'm going to begin with a poem titled May Days. The last day in May 2007 ended with the least rain on record. By the end of May 2007, over 3,300 US soldiers died in Iraq. On the first day of May 2010, a shopkeeper in Mosul is shot dead, part of the ongoing war violence. Reported by the Iraq Body Count Project, he is one of over 100,000 documented civilian deaths in Iraq since the beginning of the 2003 invasion due to war-related violence. May 18th, 2010, 1,000 US soldiers have died in Afghanistan. Sleep coils through the yellowing grass, walnut trees drop their oils, soil goes barren, the apricot tree planted last year now wicker. A fourth suicide has been reported. They keep them still in cages there across the Gulf. No accurate count of the dead children, of the poisoning of wells, the infant mortality rate that surges, the bounty of facts, the camps, Gaza, Baghdad, Kabul, are seething. That is the word, the accurate word, the temperature rising on summer's long approach, and the crowding like shooting fish in the barrel. Lieutenants say, no one has taken yours, no one has come for you. The lawns dry, the ground packed with dust, rains, vacancy, yours and mine have not vanished with no mercy. Each May I write this, adding the numbers again, adding the cities that rhyme, Peshawar, Kandahar, hectares burning, flesh burnt off. Who will look at you when you return? Who will take you as a wife in 5 years? Who will sponge your body down? Forsaken, is that a word still to be used? Forsaken, that moment in the valley when the shadows grow even in the afternoon's heat, and the apprehension there is no one left, and how bread and water would be more than splendor could offer. So what if it could still be said, written, that forsaken could be what we are? There would be no less than that. Finches continue their song, thickets fill with what the wind carries hand to mouth, the valleys open out. What were you thinking then? The grass, sere, the sky's one eye, bluest in its emptiness, the eye we pass hand to hand, that last name ours, sharpening its beak to tear at us. The psalmist passes. That was then and now. Afternoon lowers itself into the locust trees. Loved ones vanish. Only their bodies turn up on the edge of highways, riverbanks, empty rooms. Only their bodies. To say that eclipses their wounds, what goes missing, the number, what would be sufficient now to say bodies means flesh, means words made flesh. How we perish, thought perishes too with each word, and sorrow, the weather of place. The next poem has a reference to a Tang Dynasty, Chinese Tang Dynasty poet, Wei Ying Wu, who lived in from about 737 to about 790. He was someone of a fallen aristocratic family, and he resorted to writing poetry and wandering about China. And some of his poems make their way into this, particularly the poem called The Ballad of the Jade Digger. And it's translated by Red Pine, a wonderful Chinese, wonderful translator of Chinese poetry. So this poem is Fox Sparrow. What is known comes, abrupt, jump cut to here, then gone. One banded, caught and released was 10. How many migrations from conifer forests south, or blown across the North Atlantic to Iceland or Greenland, scrabble in the Orkneys, a vagrant there, fox red bandings with fox gray hooding, autumn chrysanthemums cluttered with maple leaves, waiting for the cherry to drop its last gold leaves. What to be attentive to this autumn, how to be attending to the song, the arc before time runs to its last dark stop. To pick out essential markings remembered from the guide is to pick out differences when ranges overlap and geography is song. Due south through shale hills, crossing into Susquehanna and Delaware watersheds, flare light in the hardwoods. And tonight I read Wee Young Woo, who wrote The Jade Digger on the Lan River, sleeps in the cold thicket, conscript to dig, one from each family, to dig out the verdant stone, moss stone. We watches the vanishing river, the moon bell struck, and the conscript's wife miles south, he wrote in 775, weeps. In the cold hut, husband gone for months. In hard times, hoe the garden of stones, eat the print of a tiger in the snow, sip from the vanished river above dawn, take from one hand and place in the other the light of a lantern, the only gold we have on this path. Everything travels, slippages through shale, fissured and laced, pores of seep and migration upwards into limestone and aquifer, vagrant element in the rock, displaced and shunted up, methane rings, carbon releases, condensings of time and mass, tanker trucks on the gravel access roads, deep into the hardwoods, the clear cut for long hauls to flush the Tulane and radium from the well's slick water. Snow starts to fall in the high ridges. The whippoorwills have left their calls in the leaf litter, and buckshot cans, Severe's lines, posted signs shot out with who the fuck cares in dotted Morse and contrail, slash of white across the sky. All the leavings, oracles of what came to be, past, the one truth that continues its seep bloodline drip, a melody that holds a tune, one sound, the unwrapping of stars. Wee Ying Woo whispers to me to slip into a boat with the early snow and oar into the lake's long reach. Chrysanthemums still bloom in the cold. Come back. Show me your feelings. Wine has no taste when drinking alone. The lake, a sheen of gray, early snow, geese, gray and white, rise from the waters as a single lifting and down pressing of wings, like a rush of summer rain across the water. The years are migrations, each one to the north again. The work of creation never stops. The green half moons scale the fair lilac, the viburnum's green knots on leafless branches. The fox sparrow lands, flying south, its song to teach to sing no destination, only direction. Sparrow in the bare bush watches me ready to fly and gone, a bowl of air where its song was held. So migrations and birds are a large part of my life. We have a lot of bird feeders and we're watching orioles and hummingbirds right now. In this short poem, Azulitos, or which is the Spanish for the indigo bunting is another kind of bird poem. Also, you know, the idea of migration and birds and our own human movements are I think echoed in some ways in Azulitos in bird migrations. So Azulitos, from the window, sighting one, thought flew out to meet it. The desire to see it is suddenly seeing into blue, or seeing blue, or from it a scrap of sky fallen, indigo, as the bunting swung through the low branching maple, then out across the open, an arc of blue, mineralized in air, blue, this blue only for incipient months of air-spun maple seeds, cherry blossoms, a white out in a sudden gust. Is it epiphany or coincidence only when thought becomes tethered, coincidences, attention, still, what blue from thought or far copse they emerge, night migrants without light to diffract into cyan, they turn black, wintering, Azulitos follow an arc of islands north, slipping the borders to weedy stretches of crops and woods, arriving to this world in a moment, indigo, then gone into thin air, the slatted light of goldenrod and milkweed. Dog fox. In the bitter afternoon, 3 crows hunt. The sun-packed, in the bitter afternoon, 3 crows hunt. The snow-packed road where a fox passed earlier. From where I watched, I could not see what they found. No one had traveled except wind, driving snow and solitary fox from woods, trees in black lacquer of ice melt and refreeze. Wrapped in its hunger, the fox moves past the line of dark pines, certain of direction. The woods around him fold their wind-guttered messages into the air. The snow's frail crust collapses with the fox's headway from barren farms up the ravine, an innuendo slipping through red cane thickets, escaping notice, a shadow across a yard. The fox keeps moving, knowing no mercy in the air, or its lack, gray shadow, burr tangled in these depleted months, meadows and yards, pounded into ice, gold leaves blackened in suspension. Then the dog fox disappears, running on blind faith at the town's straight edge. So that's winter. I'm going to turn to another short poem, May's Velocities. And in this poem, there are more migrants, but in this case, the migrants are butterflies that we find often in this neck of the woods. May's Velocities. First mosquitoes hunger as a hummingbird early in its velocity passes bee-balm globes not yet spiked in red, flamboyant columbine in first bloom, and mock orange sends green racers straight up, light as scent, the lip of heat, tidal as summer, against the house's fieldstone foundation. A dusky wings outfolded, flattened, flush to fieldstone. I thumb the guides and compare photos to memory, the slip of names one world introduces another, dreamy or Zeruko, cloudless, sulfur, Horus or juvenile. Some say this is the last we'll see of the great migrations, arcs from Veracruz, Esmeralda, the Isle of Pines, pilgrimages south to north and back, migrants bringing a song back spun from milkweed, lantana, wild morning glory, spun from the way after long fasting, from what began this world, split from other durations to this range and field, then flight in another duration, a single tense I can't parse, urgent to clasp the warm rising of day. I'm going to read a poem from my first book, just to change things a little bit. And this is titled Cryptography. And some of you will, since many folks listening undoubtedly head out to the Montezuma Wildlife Refuge occasionally to check out the osprey and what else is landing and leaving. So there's a bit of geography here. Cryptology. Between Maze Pond and the main pool, marsh grass, cattails, bough slantwise blown, maples hung in yellow, veined in cinnabar anthocyanins. Geese have begun to land, knowing the signature of this place by its pull from the north as the light breaks apart on the thin waters of ponds. In the clear cut, the land driven to pasture between Junius ponds, there is less memory of what was before, heaps of stones with old mosses, marginalia for what was here. Chain link and barbed wire, the air fills with ice thorns that catch on my clothes, whole constellations scatter from the reeds. What holds in this life, hawk on post at the marsh edge, waiting for mouse or hare, while I-90 carries its wind and ash west. The smell of gasoline cuts the marsh in half at the height of summer. The sky and apse of blue, a Sunday afternoon on a track along Esker Brook after the Trillium and Jack in the Pulpits had died back and the flies had risen into their one song that could persist forever. A group of Amish, 6 men and 6 women, passed me in the splotched sunlight, walking toward the deeper woods. A spider's web pulled taut across the path. They have gone another way while I duck around it, ready to head back home, leaving it air hung, its study uninterrupted. The brook almost dry, maybe it runs only with snowmelt or a wet summer. Blue-tipped black dragonflies cling to the leaf edge of dock or plantain. In us all, no word is lost. However, the leaves tilt upwards, dry, rising late each night since summer. My heart rides up close to my skin as though I were in thin air. Looking across the locked yards and tight houses, I think my soul has left me, as if this were proof then of having a soul, its departure. The wind stirs the vines outside the window. Under the moon, the sandbars must glow in the marsh like figures in script, herons in slate waters, redwings on the whip of a reed, martins driven into the lightening sky. The next poem is titled Fire Regime. And partly this poem was written in response to some of the massive fires out west in the past summer seasons, and also the fires in the tar sands region in Alberta, the those oil fields that are made from scraping the topsoil and digging down into the into the uh, into the stone and oil-laced ground, and that caught fire and turned into massive fires. Fire regime. Recurrence, lightning strike, struck for renewal, crack the seed, clear the brush for release and continuity. Before the roads climbed into the hills, chaparral, thin boss, or across palmetto scrub, cycles break, if there are still cycles. If this is the way to think about how things once worked, if they ever did, in those terms where work is a bond in language, accruing its own legacy, method shaping the landscape, roads, isobars, up hillsides, and trapped in its convergence of advancing flames, deer, bear, centipedes, orb spinners, mice. We are like that now. Keep to the walls, out of the line of notice, sight, registration, alarms. The fire pushes us, each in our own direction, which is the same, controls, instruments. The path of flames widens. Trees, candle topping, consuming urgency to continue. Every season more widespread. This is the worst, said every year. More seasons now seasons equal entire years. No punctuating rain. Heavy fog pushed in from the coast, from frontal boundaries dropping from the north. Someone told me of seeing an owl flying from an engulfed woods, flying and burning, reminding me of B-52's spiraling smoke engorged over the north's rice fields, cratered and smoking. Or when she drove out of the burning tar sands from Fort McMurray, the headlights melted from the heat, mandatory evacuations as each season crests. In West Roxbury, 23 have thrown themselves in an excavated trench for a pipeline. Core 10 steel plates cover sections where workers calibrate depth and passage. Anticipatory mass graves was the description, where heat waves crest over and over, the land a mirage, and language becomes more exact in its forecast of sea level rise. Fires moving through the forests, tundra burning, could burn for decades, spreading underground, an intrusion, a spectra of conditions, eroding, calibrations revised. She drove so quickly, at any moment she could have burst into flame. After the warnings, each a measure for the next, an emergency of slowness. Is this any worse than before? I am haunted by the thought, who counts as human? Whose lives count as lives? As language evacuates its own territories, who is swept along in the rescue, in the naming, in the columns for those saved, those lost, sold, or free? Summer night, lawn brittle from a lack of rain, codes in Lucifer's diminishing. Who will find each other, as you and I did once before we thought we needed, or before the words for this were needed, the collusion of bodies in space, each leaning into another and another, the heavy pods of milkweed, the lift of goldenrod and coral mallows. More difficult than before, disturbances coming sooner and leaving so little, a slippage over stones and fallen trees. All this to attend to now, a finitude, time runs out, something else starts. And I'll close with a poem, the title poem of the collection, In Time. In time, watching the verdant return to seeing it seems, from that occipital lapis, lyric of rod and cone, atlas and pyramid, lobed and flowering. I would like to think of you arriving in this air out of seeing then, beside all accounts made finite and falling away. To you, bud leaf and resinous, sun-gorged incipients. We could say all starts as speculation, spread to breaking all rules, springing, thinking of you in time, coming to light, certain, certainly you. Thank you.
Thank you. I will unmute everyone. Let's see. All right, everyone should be unmuted unless they have their own microphones muted personally. But is there any questions? Let's see. See.
Hi, Kristen.
Kristen says she can't seem to unmute herself. Let's see if I can unmute you. Kristen, if you go to the bottom left-hand corner of your, there you go.
I think I'm all set. Thanks.
Yep.
Hey, James, how are you?
Good.
I would love to know more about the publication of the book and sort of how your editor brought the three of you together and what it was like. I guess it sounds like you finished the book before that editorial process really began, but like what it's like publishing with three people, even though you weren't necessarily writing with them.
So I got an invitation to basically, well, what would you think of being in a book with two other people? It was really out of the blue. The idea, I think, was, well, maybe there's more synergy with three people in a book. Our work is really very different from each other's work. And in terms of, there was no conversation between the three of us. It really is bringing three different books together. So we can't talk about it as a collaboration. It really is, if you know Cage and Cunningham's work, just slapping them right together. In terms of my part in this, the whole process was like any other publication. I edited my part, and the other folks edited their part. We were pretty agreeable about the design of the book. Etruscan Press is doing a second trio, and I have a feeling that they like this idea of bringing three very different poets together. It's a, there's a certain ego when you have this, your own book, and then of course you're sharing this. So this makes it a bit more of a community in the truer sense, and yeah. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I don't know what was in the editor's mind, why he thought these three, outside of what he wrote, that he really liked all three books and wanted somehow to publish them. So.
Let's see, any other questions? Cynthia looks like she has a question. She says, could you say something about poets as political speakers in the juxtaposition of natural world and the political world?
Okay. So I think my poetry often fits into maybe the genre of, if there's such a genre, of eco-poetics, and a reading of the landscape as holding different communities, and by communities, I would like to think of communities in terms of certainly human communities, as, living on Seneca land, living with histories of enslavement, histories of migration, human migration, and agrarian communities, but also animal communities and plant communities, and even, I would say, mineral communities, earth and clay communities, the fossil records. So we're in this kind of world of interconnections, And I think the role of the poet in terms of politics and the environment is much like the poet Donald Ravel taught me to become more and more attentive. Poetry, I think, is a way of becoming, of training your attentiveness, attentiveness to your own being, but also certainly to the world outside you and around you. So the idea of poetry as attentiveness is really important, of noticing. And then the poet W.S. Merwin has long been influential for me, and his thought of, in a sense, recording our presence as humans across the landscape, making sure that we make note of what we have done and what we're doing. And I think poets are kind of those record keepers, if you will. So in that way, I think poetry and language and poetry and politics are important, but also, last but not least, and going back to Denise Levertov, poets make language and make it new. So that's a really political position, to look at something new, to write the language in a new way is a renewing and optimistic process, maybe a process of teaching, maybe the process of changing things. Of course, that means people have to read it.
Looks like, I apologize if I say it wrong. Diana says that she has too much background noise at her house to ask a question over the video, but how do you set aside time to write with your teaching position?
Actually, I think teaching is the best position to have for a variety of reasons. You have a lot more time where you can kind of mold your time to your own ends. So teaching is wonderful for that. Also, teaching is, you know, I never try out a poem with my students or anything, but I teach other poets, other poems. And in that way, I do my reading and my research with my students. They don't know that necessarily, but they're part of this process of my my learning and my understanding of the world. So I teach a course, for example, on African American poetry and landscape and eco-poetics and environmental justice. And so all the reading that I'm doing for that course and hearing what they have to say helps me think about, in a very different way, my own writing. And then, you know, you just have to find time. You have to cut out a time. So we don't vacuum the house as much as we should. For example, the lawn is pretty good, but, you know, I'm putting off mowing once again so I can write another poem. So you make choices. And writing poems is very different than writing a novel. If I had to write a novel, it would be terrible. But you can carve out 15 or 20 or 30 or an hour of time more easily than you know, the long expanse that you have to write for a novel. So poetry is very economical, very compact. you can always be writing it.
And the next question is, do you write by hand or on the computer?
I use the computer. It's much easier also for revision and rearranging things. I grew up in the age of typewriters, so that's where I started writing, was on typewriters. And if you make a mistake, you know, you have to retype the whole darn thing, or else go into whiteout and all that nonsense. So computers are great, but I know friends who write by hand, and then they transfer it all onto a computer. It's whatever I think is one finds most convenient. That said, no one touches my computer because it's like my notebook. It's my instrument. It's my violin or whatever, if you will. So. Going back to the question about how do you find time to write, there are always these poets who are scribbling things on pieces of paper and stuffing them in their pockets, and then reassembling them. Donald Ravel talks about doing that. I think William Carlos Williams wrote on prescription pads as he was seeing his patients. Emily Dickinson certainly wrote on every scrap of paper, backs of envelopes. So it's a process, and it's ongoing.
All right, do we have any other questions or comments?
Gerhart needs to unmute herself. If you could mention that.
Does Mary Gerhart need to unmute herself?
I think, yeah, I think maybe. I saw in another presentation that they said once you post a question, you're supposed to give people like 40 seconds before they, to give them enough time to like respond via chat, to type in something with their questions. But I don't know if that's necessary today, but I don't know if anyone else has any questions or comments they would like to pose. Well, there's video. I think I might mute Mary. I'm not sure what's going on with her background noise, or if she was trying to say something or not. Okay, doesn't look like there's any. Mary doesn't know how to use chat, but she can call or email.
Yeah. You can always contact me.
Yes, I can unmute Mary if she would like to ask a question.
No, thank you. No, I'm in and out because I'm making dinner for somebody else. I have the luxury just of listening. I don't, but I really enjoyed the setting of the poetry um, in the particular area of the country and the history and the geography. I really enjoyed that, and I love the poetry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Do you have any works that you're currently in the process of working on right now?
Yeah, I have 3 other manuscripts of poems that are in various, or pretty close to being all done. So yeah, they're constant. I have I was going to read another longish poem, but I decided not to. That's in a collection of eco-poetics that you can Google and find, as well as some prose poems that just came out from Conjunctions on their online platform. So yeah, I'm always writing, or I try to be always writing.
And
It's,
I'm not
yes.
sure if we have any aspiring poets in the participant list right now, but do you have any advice for them if they were in the audience currently?
Patience. Patience is the most important thing, I think. And you know, I don't think I really wrote a good poem until I had children. I was reflecting on that one night, and I think really my really good poems, if I have any, and I don't know if I do, but if I do, they came after I had kids. So I think not that having kids is the prerequisite for writing a poem, but I think at some point there's some life moment that makes it all more urgent to write something, and also to think about it in just the opposite way, as not urgent, but something that should be as seemingly unobtrusive as breathing or something like that. So patience, and think of it as just a process that becomes as normal as cooking, or as hoeing the garden, or doing what you need to do in your daily life. I think that's probably also important. Why I think reading is important. It's part of the whole process. So go to your libraries, for example, and check out books and read. Because I think all poets are really talking to themselves and talking to other dead poets. So yeah, patience, read, and think of it as an ongoing process. And don't worry. Don't worry. That's big, especially now. Yeah. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and for Alexis for inviting me, and indulging a poet with his work.
Thank you so much for coming out and giving us a piece of your work and giving us some of your talent and sharing information with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope to see everyone in real life one day.
It looks like we have silent waves and rounds of applause there.
Okay.
Oh, and videos are coming on with silent waves there. I don't know if you can see them. But thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you guys all for coming out for this event.